What's up, guys? Welcome back once again to another episode of Eddie G's Comic Culture. I am your host, Eddie G, and here bringing it to you live with another brand new tasty episode. Here to discuss all things comic book related, films, cartoons, music as well, anything pop culture from the 80s, 90s to the present. Um, Thank you guys for tuning in. If you guys are brand new to the show, I want to welcome you guys into this platform of mine. I actually call it a forum, really. Um, Basically, I created this show to have something to discuss along with many friends and fans alike all over about comic book related issues as well as pop culture and movies and cartoons. It's not just a basic show, honestly, but it talks about a lot. I go basically into a wide variety of topics regarding entertainment. And so if you're just tuning in right now, thank you for tuning in. Um, Basically, every as I usually do with every one of my episodes, I always started off giving a special shout out to the friends and family that I've been riding with this show since the very beginning. First and foremost, a special shout out to a friend and brother of mine, Kevin Seawright, who has been doing such a fantastic job on this show with the wonderful contributions that he's done. This show is sponsored once again. Excuse me, sponsored once again by the good folks over at Black Apparel. So in case you guys have an opportunity to do so, make sure you check out their website at www.blackapparelblk.com. They've got some awesome content for you to check out, and if you have some ducats you're willing to splurge on, they got some cool merchandise as well. So whenever you have the opportunity, make sure you check them out. And first, and of course, I'm giving a good shout out to good friends on Instagram on my account. First is the Strictly Comedy Vault. He's a young up and coming writer who's also got an awesome page. He constantly keeps refreshed with great content. Make sure you check him out if you have the opportunity to do so. He's always cool. He's always got some stuff regarding, especially the Funko Pop figures if you guys are fans of them, and as well as movies and comic book variant covers as well. He's got some pretty good stuff. And also the Blu-ray Dan, who also has an Instagram page, but also more importantly, he does have his own YouTube channel, which is actually a good inspiration, a big inspiration as to what I'm doing this show right about now. He does a lot of unboxings of good movies, actually on Ultra 4K and regular Blu-rays. He's got some pretty good, like a lot of steelbook stuff that he's got too. But more so, he also has reviews of films on his channel as well. So make sure you check him out. He's got some good stuff on there. And last but not least, I want to send a special shout out to a good friend of mine from New York City in the Bronx, Dennis Knight, who's a writer of the Cross comic, being published by the indie label Pronto Comics, who's actually going to be there. He's actually going to be out there this weekend at the New York Comic Con at the Javits Center. So if you guys have tickets and you want to check out some cool independent work, make sure you stop by at his booth. It's the 966 Pronto, booth number 966 Pronto Comics Small Press Section. So make sure you check him out. Well, now that I got that out the way, this episode I wanted to dedicate it to, as of recently, I've been watching a lot of old stuff regarding WWF. I realize that I've said WWF, not WWE. I know the name change. I know the brand change, of course, has happened for quite some time now. But when I was growing up in the 80s and the 90s, it wasn't the WWE. It was actually the World Wrestling Federation. And with that being said, I was actually trying to do. I actually had the idea of actually doing this episode for quite some time, and in particularly so, it was much more important now that what was this? One of the famous managers from that area who recently passed away, Bobby the Brain Heenan. Um, Man, let me start off by saying that I have, like I said, growing up in the '80s and the '90s, one of the main things outside of HBO late night boxing and so on and so forth was actually was WWF. That thing was a huge phenomenon. The '80s wrestling was really, the '80s was really like a pivotal point for wrestling. It really broke through. A lot of big names came out at that time. Of course, you guys all know Hulk Hogan, and then who was like huge for like he was a huge big deal along with Andre the Giant, Cowboy Bob Orton, also as well who happens to be Randy Orton's father. Um, a few other classic wrestlers. One of my favorites, of course, is the Ultimate Warrior. I think my the favorite wrestler from me of all time actually is Macho Man Randy Savage, of course. R.I.P. to both, actually, both Ultimate Warrior and Randy Savage, and quite a bit. It was really such a it was really a, wrestling was really a big deal back in the days. Back in the 80s and the 90s, and particularly so in the early 90s, wrestling was a really big deal. And it really took off a lot. It really took off and saw in popularity around the 80s. That's when these characters actually started coming out, and you had characters like Bob Backlund, Mr. Perfect, Ric Flair, and it was really something to see these cats, because the only other time, the only other WWF was so big as far as being a brand name at that time regarding wrestling. The only other wrestling company that was around was WCW, that was more well known, and then of course you had the ECW, which started out as a small local brand, which actually focused more on the brutality of wrestling in a lot of ways. Which was also pretty cool, considering that being from Queens, they actually filmed quite a bit of the show of ECW, and like on and one of the hotels, I can't forget, I forgot the name of the hotel, but it was on Queens Boulevard, not far from Queens Center Mall, and that was when, like, you had the Sandman and RVD and Sabu and a whole bunch of these characters that were pretty much, some were good, some were not. They were just, for the most part, a lot of them were just insane, realistically speaking, because since it was extreme wrestling, it was a lot of, it was basically, like I mentioned before, it basically focused a lot on the brutality, where WWF was more the mainstream brand at that time, and it really was. It developed a lot of big name characters, a lot of classic characters that I grew up with. A couple of friends of mine in my from my age bracket also grew up with. It was an incredible scene. It was an incredible scene, and that's when we all knew that wrestling was always scripted. We never knew that it was just like, At some point, we did believe that it was real, but in all honesty, we all knew that it was really scripted. At the end of the day, none of those stories was really true. None of those stories really At some point, there were some aspects of it that were true, like Macho Man Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth, of course, were actually married for a short period of time, and there was quite a bit going on. Bret the Hitman Hart, the Hart family. That was like one of the first dynasties in wrestling, actually, before before the Johnson family took over and became the new dynasty in wrestling that we know now. But it was an unbelievable time period, man. It was crazy because it was Hulk Hogan was pretty much the shit. Outside of Hulk Hogan, it was Andre the Giant, who was one of the most lovable people I've ever, he was one of the most lovable characters ever seen, ever to set foot into that stage, into the ring, actually. He was one of the few cats, actually, that had, he also had, him and Hulk Hogan actually had like had someone that was kind of they were kind of the beginning of the slide, of the acting careers that some of these wrestlers had. We all know that The Rock, Dwayne Johnson now is actually, he's actually one of Hollywood's most sought after actors, and but before that, of course, he was a legendary. He still is a legendary wrestler. Honestly, he's an icon. But at this point, he's well established. To me, in my opinion, I think he's already well established as a legend in the WWE roster. But before him, we had like Hulk Hogan that made movies. He had the No Holds Barred, and a whole bunch. I mean, a lot of his movies afterwards were pretty much just complete flops. Because you couldn't expect much out of Hulk Hogan to act, but there were some other great characters, and like I said before, my favorite was always Macho Man Randy Savage. He was always such a vivid character. He had that cool bravado and swagger to him that really was just out of this world. He had the shades, he had the shades, the bandana. If not the shades, he always had the shades. But if he didn't have the bandana on, he had his the cowboy hat, and he had the most extravagant outfits to walk out onto the scene. And then of course you have guys like Ric Flair. Ric Flair was like the first. The first lavish character. He always talked about exactly how he was styling, profiling, the Rolex wearing, the wheeling, dealing, He was a great character, man. These were like this was like the very beginning of wrestling, and it was fun to watch. It really was fun to watch, especially when I was a kid and I would watch it with my dad, and sometimes even with my older brother. And I remember having the games for the NES, the first WrestleMania games for NES, and it was really something else because it was just like they weren't the greatest, but it was just wrestling was the shit back then. It was really what it really was the shit, and a lot of the characters that were there, um, really had something going on. Like if they weren't funny, they were sick. If they weren't funny, then they were awesome. It was just it was. Then you had the few that were just like the also rans that never really made a name for themselves. But it was always it really was in a gray area. You had either you were gonna be the 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 face, the good face, or you were gonna be the comedic, the laughing stock. So you had guys like that didn't really what was that other? They had guys like the IRS, you know, or even more so Hacksaw Jim Duggan, who was a more he looked like a complete drunk every time he walked out on the stage. Walked down to the to the arena every time, but it had it made for some great entertainment. It really did make for some great entertainment, especially when they used to have the Saturday night main event back in the days, and then of course the build up to WrestleMania was always something that was huge. And I'll never forget of course you had not like I said the heavy hitters in the game were always Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, Andre the Giant, and then you had the other cats like the heels like Jake the Snake Roberts, and you know then you had Razor Ramon and Mr. Perfect, so on and so forth. Oh, of course, I'm not to mention Shawn Michaels, the Heartbreak Kid, who was actually cause of one of the greatest upsets in WrestleMania history when he took the title from Bret the Hitman Hart. Um, and of course, you had some of the greatest matches known to mankind, and they really just the way that they managed to surround the hype, the stories around these matches was really something else. A lot of a lot of that magic hasn't really struck gold for them so far as of recent to me anyway. I'm not really too much on these new characters in the WWE. They really not my cup of tea, honestly, but. It seems to be working a lot more now, more so now than ever, because it looks like a lot more wrestlers are becoming actors, which is it makes sense. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it does make sense. These guys do go out there, they perform, and they throw down every week. And so they have to build a character for themselves in order for them to last long. Because if they didn't have a character for themselves, like how are they possibly going to stand out? How could they possibly be remembered? But the matches that were had back in the days were pretty incredible, and I'll never forget the upset that people like when Hulk Hogan and Ultimate Warrior were going head to head with one another, and for that WrestleMania, it was such a huge main event, man. That blew the roof off of everybody. The people were, one side you were either Team Hogan or you were Team Warrior, and a lot of people were pretty much against him. Were pretty much Ultimate Warrior because he was the new cat. He was awesome, honestly. His on screen presence was absolutely breathtaking. The man knew how to get the crowd riled up for him. Everybody cheered for him, and then of course, everyone was just oh, he's bigger than Hulk Hogan. Like Hulk Hogan was his own. He wasn't a small fry. There was no way in hell Hulk Hogan was a small cat at all. Um, he really was a big dude, considering that, even now at his age, but back then, like, he was a really big cat, so a lot of people were really just, like, but a lot of people felt like, that, Ultimate Warrior was the more brolic character. He was the more, he was the cool cat for the game. So when he took the title from Hogan, it was pretty incredible to say the least. And of course, Undertaker. I'll never forget the Undertaker. And actually, I remember kind of when he first came in, his first entrance into the WWF, and that was when he had the pallbearer. He doesn't use that guy anymore, and thankfully so. I think it's time for him to actually retire, anyways, because Undertaker, as of recent, throughout the last 10, 15 years, like, he's been suffering, like, he's been prone to injuries so much so on these matches. So but it was an incredible time period to be a fan of wrestling, and these characters, they really paved the way for for a lot of the folks that you see now. that actually have their have actually done some time already in the business, such as Chris Jericho, The Rock, Brock Lesnar, so on and so forth. You got guys like John Cena and Batista, was another great example at this point right now. He's turned out to be a pretty great actor. Honestly, he really did turn out to be a pretty great actor. Thankfully, so actually with his big break in Guardians of the Galaxy, and it looks like he's really doing. He's really killing it. I can't wait to see him this weekend in Blade Runner, of course. But it was such a great time to be a fan of wrestling. Every character was just it had such they had all the appeal in the world. You could not like, and it was hard to say who was the best, who was the worst, because everyone was such a likable character. And no matter who was at, no matter who had a match, you were rooting for somebody during those days. Nowadays, it's like you could watch the matches, you could watch Raw, you could watch some of the pay-per-views, and it's just like, whatever. But but back then, that wasn't the case at all. So you were actually rooting for quite a few characters into the in the business and the industry. And like I said, my favorite was always Macho Man. Ooh yeah, Macho Man Randy Savage. I usually do a better impression right about now, but because I'm filming, it's hard for me to be placed on the spot like that. But and then on top of that, they had such a it had such an impact, dude, that the video games that followed, and then on top of that, they had the merchandise that came with it, the action figures, the plush dolls that they had, that a lot of kids used back in the days to actually do their own wrestling in their bedrooms, or like they like you could just try to fly or pretend to fly off the turnbuckle. I imagine there was quite a few kids that probably like hurt themselves doing these moves in their home, because when you try to do a flying elbow from the top of a dresser drawer, you're gonna have a problem. You're looking, that was just a recipe for disaster anyway. But it was really a great time to be a fan of wrestling. Every character was just stellar in their own right. They had their own appeal. They had their own. There was always an attraction for you guys to see, for everyone to see them every time. And it was just every week. It was just to talk something. It proceeded. It just at school there was always a discussion regarding the matches that went on. At some point, wrestling was actually bigger than. I would say wrestling was actually bigger than boxing at some point throughout the 80s and the 90s. I'd say that there was a time period that the WWF was really holding it down so much that it was bigger than, because they always sold out arenas. They always sold out these huge arenas packed to the brim for these wrestling matches. So people were buying it. People, there was a tremendous fan base, of course, and the amount of characters that were created that entered into the field that we know and love today are still, some of them are still around. Some of them, unfortunately, have passed. Um, it sucks actually, because especially when it was when it's always the wrestlers that you kind of grew up with. You had that core, that it tugs at your heart to see that, because they were your favorite characters. Like I said, it hurt me when I saw Randy. When I heard Randy Savage died. All those years, about what's that? Wow, 2011 it happened. And then Ultimate Warrior, when we lost Ultimate Warrior, that was another knife to the gut. So it was pretty hard to see these characters go away. And then we also started to see the deterioration of certain individuals in the industry. One being Hulk Hogan himself. It sucked to find out that he had those racial tensions in him, and which was like the cherry on the top. Which was like the cherry on the top when it came to Hulk Hogan, because he was one of the very few. He was one of the characters that had always had problems behind the lockers in the locker rooms with a lot of these guys. A lot of people really didn't like him. They didn't really take to him too well. They felt that he was phony, like he was a fake, and like he was just some hot, like he just walked around like he was big shit on campus. And I understand that. I get to the point. I get that at some point you do have. There's one point for you to have that, to carry yourself a certain way with a certain bravado, but at the same token, it's just like, you got to recognize your peers as well, and He ended up having to mend he ended up having to mend a lot of relationships, a lot of professional business relationships that pretty much, from reading countless reports anyways, but from what I've read, that he ended up having to mend a lot of broken relationships that he had with a lot of the superstars in the past, because his ego literally outgrew him, which was hard. It was sad to say, but like I said, even more so when it became when it broke news broke out about the racial tension that he had. It was even that was just okay. I gotta write this guy off. I can't support him. You know what I'm saying? That's just me. I really can't support a person like that who feels that way about anybody. Because once that happens, that's usually a domino effect, man. Once they start saying stuff like that, then it goes on to it gets worse and worse. The more it's like how's it say? It's like an onion. The more layers you peel off, the more it stinks. That's exactly what seemed to be there. That's exactly what happened with him, with Mr. Hogan. So hopefully he gets some closure on that. But things like that, and especially people in that age bracket, it's very difficult for them to change. Very rarely does it happen. Hopefully it does, but I'm not betting on it. But I have to thank them for, I definitely am appreciative of all the memories that he made for us, all the commemorative moments that he's made throughout his career, and bringing some of the best feuds onto the table that I've ever seen. Then especially with him and Randy Savage when they got involved with the thing about Randy Savage was that when him and Miss Elizabeth were together, they always called her Miss Elizabeth, but when him and Elizabeth were together, like every one of his matches really centered at some way. His main event matches somewhat centered around his relationship with her, and it happened with Hogan and it happened with Ric Flair. So I don't get I don't get exactly. So at that point, like they kind of ran with it for a while, and then afterwards, they dropped the relationship. And then they really got divorced actually, and throughout, they really did get divorced prior to their passing. Both, because R.I.P. to Miss Elizabeth as well, who I saw a lot of people were. There's a kind of an unsolved mystery case with that. A lot of people felt that Lex Luger was responsible for her death, and nothing really. They didn't really say that he murdered her. I'd say, no, I don't know. I really don't know. But I don't want to. I don't want to get into that. But R.I.P. to Miss Elizabeth, because she was a really cool character. Honestly, she was really a cool character in the WWF at that time. And then, of course, like I said, you have the funny characters in the game, like the IRS. Who else? Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Oh, how could I forget Bam Bam Bigelow? He was he was a monster. He was a monster. He was pretty scary. And then you had, I believe, the Road Warriors, if I'm not mistaken. They were pretty awesome too. Not to lie, you know what I'm saying? I'm not gonna lie about that. They were pretty awesome as well. British Bulldog and Brutus the Barber Beefcake. These were all wrestlers I grew up with, man. And then you had Jimmy Hart, the guy with the Southern wrestling. He was a manager, the Southerner with the loud the megaphone. He was funny as hell too. But these were like I said, man. With those characters, everything was. They made the WWF worth watching every night, man. Every week that it was on, every day that the days that they were on, every week you were watching it. You were glued to the set, no matter what. It was from kids to adults, all ages, Papa. Everyone that loved the show, that loved wrestling, at that time was on top of it. Pay-per-views were selling. They made pay-per-view made a lot of money off of wrestling. They really did, and I think they still do till this day, actually. But what an incredible time, man! Like they were, like I said, they were. It was just awesome. Wrestling was really awesome. As the years went by, of course, then came the Attitude Era. And then, you had the characters like Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock come in, and Triple H, so on and so forth. Goldberg as well. And at that point, the WWF, for some reason, I don't know why they did that, but they ended up, to me, that lawsuit was kind of ridiculous, because I felt like if the World Wrestling Federation had that, had that, was they had that acronym, I believe that they should have had that, once it was, they had it longer than the World Wildlife Federation, which I don't know what the hell that was. But I believe that Vince McMahon should have stayed with the WWF. It shouldn't have been like. It's still, because even after all these years, the WWE it just seems strange to say it. It just sounds fake. It really it kind of solidifies the false nature behind what this show really, about, wrestling federation wrestling as it is, anyways. And then after a while, they acquired the ECW, but then the ECW didn't really work out for them either, you know, for whatever reason. But no, bullshit. I know exactly. The ECW didn't really work out with him because they tried to make it family friendly, and the ECW was the opposite of that. The ECW was not a family friendly wrestling show. It was basically, like I said, it focused a lot more on the brutality. There was a lot of bloody matches, a lot of stuff, barbed wire matches that were crazy. So, like I said, Sabu was one of the prime examples. Sabu, he was a very acrobatic, but he was a nut job. He was a psycho. The man was a psycho. The man had scars all over his chest and stomach from all those barbed wire matches. He was, that dude was batshit crazy. So to say the least. So to see that this was actually happening, to see them actually have to dumb down what they really were, it tarnished everything about the ECW. So the ECW's comeback obviously was short lived because the people wanted the originality of that back. But other than that, man, it was such a fantastic time to be around. And then, of course, as a transition from the 80s to the 90s, as growing up, you got to see the introduction of more memorable characters on the scene, and that became mega superstars. It was just unreal. And I gotta thank the folks. I gotta thank them for making my childhood such a great childhood. Honestly, that was a huge spot. That was a huge spoonful of what what made the childhood so awesome coming up in those times. But R.I.P. to all those. R.I.P. to Bobby the Brain Heenan. And once again, R.I.P. to Ultimate Warrior and Randy Savage. It would have been great to see those two actually do the tag team that they were, the Ultimate Maniacs. That's kind of heartbreaking to not see that it was coming to fruition. Because right after that time, WWF decided to fire Ultimate Warrior because he had his issues as well. But R.I.P. to these characters, man. These cats were great. They shaped my childhood and gave me some great, wonderful memories. So, anyways, with that being said, I'm about to close this out right about now and round it up. But once again, you guys know the drill. What was your favorite wrestler from back then? If you remember, who was your favorite out of the WWF, not WWE, or you can do the WWE as well, or anybody from the Attitude Era, or anybody present now. I guess there's a lot of guys like Sheamus and I don't think he's there no more either, though. CM Punk, I think he left. But anybody that you felt as your favorite wrestler that you resonated with a lot, hey man, let me know if you know the drill. But once again, I'm gonna shut this one down. You guys know how to reach me. There's the comment section. If you have any questions, suggestions, or anything you want to discuss or want to see me discuss in a future episode, hit me up and let me know, man. I'd love to hear from you guys. All right, and like I said, anybody you wanna, if you feel free to let me know what was your favorite wrestler from that time period. I would love to have a discussion with you guys. That's what this forum is all about. So until next time, I'll see you guys then. Take care of yourselves and stay safe. All right, bye bye.